American reservists are leaving for Israel, and the United States is expanding its military presence in the area. Check it out, guys.
As Israel ramps up its offensive against Hamas, calling up thousands of reservists to fight.
3, 2, 1.
Scenes like this are playing out in airports across the U.S. People answering the call, leaving the U.S. to fight in Israel, and an emotional moment at LAX.
I just dropped my little brother off to go back to the army in Israel. I'm heartbroken and I'm so scared for him.
Noy Laib is already back in Israel.
So today's the day, on the way to base.
Documenting his trip on social media.
Made my way up north to say bye to my grandpa and my parents.
Leaving his job and life in New York, he didn't even wait for the call.
I actually booked my flight to Israel before I got called back because I knew what was going to happen. There's no way that I was going to sit at home.
Andrew Silberman was visiting his family in Chicago last weekend. Then he heard what was happening in Israel and got a call that his close friend had been killed. We spoke to him earlier this week.
And from there, the rest of the day became about me trying to get on a flight back to Tel Aviv.
Defense Secretary Lloyd J. Austin III has ordered a second aircraft carrier, the Dwight Eisenhower, to the region to supposedly deter hostile actions. Overall, the Pentagon is rapidly doubling the amount of American firepower that's been deployed to the Middle East to hopefully prevent a bigger, wider regional war and carry out possible airstrikes to defend American interests. But really, guys, a ton of new information is rolling in by the minute, and I got the latest for you guys right here. We need to defend our ground with or without police or military, and that starts with being fully informed. Now, starting with the military's latest moves. They say that the U.S. is expanding its military presence near Israel. They just ordered a second aircraft carrier, the Dwight D. Eisenhower, into the position, meaning possible airstrikes and overall larger presence in the area. And so the Air Force is also rushing additional land-based attack planes to the Persian Gulf region. Now that doubles the number of F-16, A-10, and F-15E squadrons on the ground. Combined with the 4 squadrons of FA-18 jets aboard each carrier, the United States will have an aerial armada of more than 100 attack planes already. The Pentagon has also sent a small team of special operations forces to Israel to assist with intelligence and planning for any operations to help locate and rescue the 150 hostages that Hamas is believed to be holding, including some Americans. But even now, American commanders are still saying that there's still a high possibility that the United States could get dragged into this conflict. Pentagon and U.S. intelligence officials are closely monitoring Hezbollah forces in Lebanon, as well as Iran-backed militias in Iraq and Syria that have periodically carried out strikes against American military personnel based in both countries. After a U.S. civilian contractor was killed and 6 other Americans were injured in March in northeast Syria by a drone that U.S. officials said was of Iranian origin, President Joe Biden, he ordered 2 F-15E fighter jets to retaliate by launching airstrikes against militant sites linked to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Now that prompted Iran-backed militias to launch a volley of rocket and drone attacks that injured another American. U.S. warplanes were supposed to conduct a second round of attacks, but the White House held off. Since then, the militia threats against Americans have subsided, but that could change with an Israeli invasion of Gaza. But then again, the U.S. provides Israel more than $3 billion in military assistance every year. And Secretary of State Anthony J. Blinken, he said that much of the equipment from that funding is already in the pipeline to be sent to Israel. The Pentagon has also positioned stockpiles of arms and ammunition worth about $2 billion at about 6 sites in Israel. The stockpiles include weapons and ammunition for the Pentagon to use in the Middle East conflicts, and the U.S. has also given Israel access to the supplies in emergencies. So really, guys, does the U.S. want in on this war or what? I mean, they're definitely giving some mixed signals here. Now, on the one hand, they say that they don't want Americans involved. But on the other hand, they're all about giving as much firepower to this war as the American people can afford. And really, what's up with the news like amazingly knowing exactly how many people are dying and missing in Israel, yet they can't figure out how many people have died or are still missing in Maui? Really makes you wonder, right? Now, if you haven't yet, seriously consider subscribing to the channel and tapping that notification bell, guys. A friend of mine said something about all of this and it kind of made me really think. He said that they must have known about this, and always remember, guys, distraction is the government's friend, right? So what are they really up to? Really, guys, we need to be getting the real news out there. And you watching this is already a good step to getting that done. Now, if you want to help get this information out, just light up the like button and also share this video with like-minded friends and loved ones, all right? We need to keep our financial freedom fam tight. I mean, it's not hard to see right after the House of Representatives descended into chaos, many Republicans, Democrats included, not to mention independent experts, warned that anarchy raging in U.S. politics sent a dangerous message to the outside world. Are you with me, guys? I mean, like, we've had a relatively calm period of peace, right? The US presidents were even getting American forces out of the region. Now, the Hamas attacks on Israeli civilians put the Middle East and the world on edge of a new era of violence and instability. And Israel's response raises the possibility of a wider regional war that would further destabilize the global order that's still trying to recover from the war in the Ukraine and China's threats against the US and Western power. And what do we have happening in Washington? Just plain old political turmoil. Internal extremism, threats of democracy, and hyper-politicization of foreign policy. I mean, honestly, this could make it near impossible to bring the country together at a perilous moment. Lawmakers want to show their support for Israel and get extra aid to their government, but the House is still missing a speaker, and the Republican Party's ability to run things is on shaky ground at best. Plus, the US is in the middle of a wild election season. Our president's got some low approval ratings, and people are talking about how old he's getting. On top of that, the possible Republican nominee might be facing some legal troubles by the time the election rolls around. So, at the very least, the United States is definitely going to be wrapped up in its own political drama for the next few months. At worst, the world's superpower, the one that's supposed to keep democracy in check, might end up making global chaos even worse. But the messed up state of American politics isn't just a problem for Israel and for Ukraine, who, by the way, are having a pretty tough time dealing with Russia's invasion. It's also sending a signal to America's enemies like Iran, which supports Hamas, and Russia and China. They're getting the idea that the United States is divided and might have trouble flexing its power to protect its own interests. Now, when I look at all the threats that are out there right now in the world, I can't help but wonder what kind of message that we're sending to our adversaries. I mean, we can't seem to get our own act together, and we don't even have a Speaker of the House. It's like a circus over there, and probably open season for our enemies to do what they do best, undermine US power and cause chaos in the country, you know what I'm saying? And think, guys, this isn't just happening in Israel and the Middle East. This year, there was this Chinese spy balloon that was flying all over US soil. And it set off a real firestorm among Republicans who were super mad at President Biden. People outside the United States are starting to think that America's internal political problems are holding it back from leading on the world stage. Now, this could give countries like China, Russia, and Iran, who have tried to mess with the US elections according to US intelligence, a very good chance for their strong geopolitical incentives to see American democracy fail. Then there's this crazy Hamas attack on Israel, which people are comparing to 9/11 in the US. It's been a real bloodbath, especially when they look at the number of casualties per person. In fact, they're already saying that this falls into the category of tragedies that could change the world. And beyond the terrible human costs, it's going to have some pretty big consequences that will reach all the way to the US. Now, if there's any proof that Iran had a hand in plotting this attack with Hamas, it's going to put a ton of pressure on Israel to deal directly with the Islamic Republic. This could lead to an even bigger conflict in the region that might involve the US. Oh, and don't forget, all this chaos is likely to throw a wrench into the works of this plan where the US is playing a key role to make things better between Israel and Saudi Arabia, along with their friends in the Arab world. If they could pull it off, it would totally change the world region and squeeze Iran even tighter. So it makes you wonder if Iran had something to do with this Hamas attack, although our officials are still trying to figure that out. And all of this is happening at a time when the administration is looking pretty shaky, trying to explain why they made a deal to free some US prisoners in Iran and ended up releasing $6 billion of Iranian cash that they had frozen. The agreement was for the money to be used only for humanitarian and medical supplies. But already, some Republican candidates are accusing the president of funding Iranian terror. GOP Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina said Biden, who's been a big supporter of Israel for ages, was complicit in the attacks. Well, it's not hard to follow the money here, guys. That's all I'm saying. And this is just going to come back and bite us all in the you-know-where. I mean, people are already talking about possible volatility in energy markets. Translation, higher gas prices, and eventually higher inflation. And inflation's been on the rise lately, mainly because of high oil prices that drove up the cost of gas at the gas pump. In September, the consumer price index went up by 3.7% compared to a year ago, which is a little bit more than what the experts were expecting. This happened because of pricier gasoline and rent, and it's a bit of a headache for regular Americans who really feel it at the gas pump. Lower gas prices could be good news for Americans, especially since we're already dealing with higher loan costs and inflation and stuff like housing. But things could easily change depending upon how it plays out in the Israel-Gaza situation. Now, right now, guys, investors are keeping an eye on the geopolitical risks of this whole thing, especially how things could unfold between Israel and their big enemy, Iran. If a clear connection to Iran comes to light, experts are saying the US might have to step in somehow. And this could mean tougher enforcement of the sanctions on Iran's oil exports, which could mess with the flow of oil in the global markets. Now, if you guys remember, sanctions were placed on Russia, and all it did was hurt us. So things could actually blow up even worse for America. Now, the thing is, guys, there's tons of uncertainty about what's happening with the whole Israel-Hamas situation, and it is super hard to predict what kind of economic mess that could come out of it. Now, the effects on inflation and growth could probably hit the region and the rest of the world harder than the US, especially if people start panicking and leaving any sort of risky investment. That's going to mean falling yields and stock prices and more economic turbulence. And that in turn is probably going to put a lot of pressure on the global economy. If oil prices shoot up, especially in today's financial situation, it might lead to more demand destruction than what we saw in 2022 when the government was still throwing cash around. And don't forget, guys, people are still dealing with student loan repayments coming back. The University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index fell 7% in October from the prior month. And that's gloomy by historical standards. I mean, really, it's not hard to see why, though. There are lots of other headlines that could easily be worrying consumers. The impasse over the next House Speaker could be adding to the fears of government shutdowns in November. You got the UAW strike, the restart of student loan repayments, and the uptick of long-term interest rates could be affecting sentiment as well. But what about you guys? Are you worried about the same things these days? I would love to hear from you in the comment section down below.